everybody, now we're going to start our penultimate part, which is like the last but one. So we're going to start with part J, which is Identity Quest Beyond Social Conventions, Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll. Now you probably remember what we saw yesterday, which was Kareem has decided, well, Kareem is leaving London and he is going to New York City. Now, guess who is in New York City? Hey? That's right, our friend, or his friend, his stepbrother, Charlie. Okay? So, Kareem is going to NYC, he's going to the Big Apple. So, Identity Quest Beyond Social Conventions, Part J, Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll. Now, before we actually start talking about the Brood of Suburbia, I would like to talk a bit about New York City. So what does New York City represent? Once again, if you hear any slurping noises, it is me with my cup of tea. So what does New York City represent? Now I'm pretty sure I just wrote New York City, just New York City. You're probably going to say, oh wow, New York City. Yellow cabs, the Statue of Liberty, there are different boroughs, it's nicknamed the Big Apple, City of Lights, etc, etc. I'm not actually asking you what can you say about New York City, I'm asking you what does New York City represent? Okay? So what does New York City represent? Now, remember the timeline, so it's the end of the 70s, okay? So it's the end of the 1970s. Now, you probably remember we actually talked about this in our previous chapter, travelling. Do you remember? A lot of people came to the USA in order to find a better life. And one of their first stops was at Ellis Island. We saw that in our previous chapter. So I think we can say a better life. Now, yesterday, if you listened carefully, you probably saw or heard that there was a lot of discontent in the UK. And those who are going to be studying any kind of political science or going to study English at university, you will hear about the 1970s, the end of the 70s, which were riddled with social and political discontent. Okay? So, we can guess that there is no or less discontent in New York City, contrary to the United Kingdom. Okay? Now, what else does New York City represent? It represents a place where what country? Where dreams come true. And that anyone, I don't want to quote Alicia Keys here, but that anyone can make it. Okay? It is easy to become famous. And, well, guess, first of all, Charlie's dream was success, success, success. So, he's gone to the right place and, as we read previously, he has become so successful. So, if Charlie can make it, then maybe Kareem can make it. I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm going to stop. arts with a capital A, because I'm not just talking about acting or singing, but the arts in general. Museums, graphic arts, vocal arts, written arts, any kinds of arts. That is the place where you'll find them. So as we said, there's also a huge amount of different kinds of music. Like if you go to Harlem, you've got all the soul music sound. Then you've got more underground sound if you go to the East Village. Very eclectic. And there are also really famous theatres, clubs, okay, stages, a lot of bars where people would actually, singers would sing for the first time. They'd be discovered in some of these famous clubs. You've also got all the famous theatres on Broadway. And many famous artists were discovered, okay? A lot of famous artists were discovered in New York City. It's also a place of originality, and where you can reinvent yourself. Okay? I'm pretty sure there are more ideas, and I'm pretty sure if we were all together we could have found some more ideas, but for the moment this is just a start. You probably don't actually know a lot about New York City in the 70s, late 70s, early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, sorry. I was going to stop saying didn't I? It's not the New York City of today, okay? It was a lot rougher, tougher, more dangerous. New York City, believe me, is one of the safest places to be, especially in Manhattan. You can walk around at 4 in the morning, take the subway at 2:30 in the morning. You will not get attacked or anything, believe me. However, at the time, not quite the same thing, okay? It was very, very, very different. I think the word you could use would be raw. It's a lot rawer in the 1970s. It was raw. It was tough. It was hard. A lot more poverty. Now, you wouldn't actually think that, would you? Now, I did give you a text to read. Now, you can print it off if you want. Here it is. Let me just wipe the board. Let's try not to break the brush again. Now, can you take this text, please? I sent it as an attached document. So you can find it attached to the email with a couple of links as well. So. Are you ready? Now, you can press pause and just read it. Just read it once, press pause, okay? And then we'll talk about it. Okay, I hope you've pressed pause. Let's read it together now. So first of all, I just want you to tell me the main ideas. very briefly in each paragraph. Let's go. So paragraph 1. I found the paragraph sign. There is a strong current of nostalgia for the late 70s and early 80s in New York. Even among those who never lived through it, the era when the city was edgy and dangerous, when women carried mace in their purses, when even men asked the taxi driver to wait until they'd crossed the 15 feet to their front door, the front door of their building, when a blackout plunged whole neighbourhoods into frantic looting, when subway cars were covered with graffiti, when George Balanchine was at the height of his powers and the New York State Theatre was New York's intellectual salon, when John Lennon was murdered by a Salinger reading Born Again, when Philip Roth was already famous, Don DeLillo had yet to become famous, etc., etc. It was a bit long, so I decided to cut it. So, what, in this first paragraph, I think the key word here is nostalgia, okay? There's a lot of nostalgia, okay? However, rather ironic that there should be such nostalgia, because it says, look, the era when the city was edgy and dangerous, when women carried mace is pepper spray, in their purses, when even men asked the taxi driver to wait. So it was not only dangerous for men and women, but there were also like blackouts, which would mean that the electricity would go out and the whole city would literally be plunged into darkness. And what were the consequences of these blackouts? Looting, pillage. Okay? Subway cars were covered with graffiti. Okay? When George Balanchine was at the height of his power, so he is, I had to look him up because I actually didn't know who he was. He's an American ballet choreographer, and he was one of the most influential 20th century choreographers. Thank you, Wikipedia. And the New York State Theatre was New York's intellectual salon. Okay? So that is very important, that the New York State Theatre was all-powerful. Okay? Very powerful. Influential. Okay? Born again means somebody who's found Christ. Okay? That's the first paragraph. Second paragraph. This was the last period in American culture when the distinction between highbrow and lowbrow still pertained, when writers and painters and theatre people still wanted to be, or were willing to be, martyrs to art. This was the last time when a New York poet was reluctant to introduce to his arty friend someone who was a Hollywood film director, for fear the movies would be considered too low status. Okay, so highbrow. Highbrow is synonymous with intellectual, okay? So it means that there was a distinction between what was intellectual and mainstream. Okay? Now just because people had a lot of money and they starred in huge Hollywood productions, it didn't mean they had the respect of this crowd, okay? And they wouldn't introduce a Hollywood film director to their arty friends, okay? Paragraph 3. Recently, there's been in TV and film, and certainly in books, an intense yearning for a specific 5-year period in New York City. Those years began with the blackout in 1977 and 1982, when AIDS was finally named by the Centers for Disease Control. So here we have the timeline of this period. You have the timeline, which would be 1977 with the blackout, to 1982 when AIDS was finally named. And they knew that a lot of people were dying from AIDS, of course. However, they didn't really have a name for it. I don't think they really knew what it was. Paragraph 4. Collectively, these works express a craving for the city that, while at its worst, was also more democratic. A place and time in which, rich or poor, you were stuck together in the misery and the freedom of the place. Where not even money can insulate you. They are a reaction to what feels like a safer, more burnished and efficient, but cornerless and predictable city. Even those of us who claim not to miss those years don't quite sound convinced. Well, I sure don't have nostalgia about being mugged. Mugged being like pickpocket. John Walter told me. Though then he continued, it seems almost impossible to remember their city. Maybe the safest in America? I'm sorry, what did I say? Do any artistic troublemakers want to feel that their city may be the safest in America? Who's going to write a book about walking the safe streets of Manhattan? It's all right, always right before a storm that the air is filled with dangerous possibilities. Okay? So of course some people will say, oh God, no, I'm not nostalgic. Oh no, never in a million years. So not nostalgic. But deep down they are. Because there was so much more democratic. Okay? It was more democratic. And that is really important because now, I don't know. If I had to move to New York City, I do not know where I'd live. So I don't think I'd have the money to actually live in New York City. But at the time, everybody, well, poor and rich would literally live side by side. Okay, paragraph 5. Then there were the only possibilities. The cultural world, at least. The cultural world, at least the cultural world that mattered, was much smaller then. Painters, new musicians, new writers, they were all accessible. It was easy then to meet John Ashbery or Jasper Johns, says Brad Gooch, the author of the recent memoir about love and loss in the 70s smash cut. Not that we took them for granted. According to Fran Lebowitz, everybody who read Andy Warhol's interview knew one another, and yet this small world had a lasting influence on American taste in music and painting and poetry and amusements. These years held the origins of the downtown scene, a multidisciplinary, simultaneous movement that was headquartered in the East Village that was characterised by the birth of punk music, gonzo journalism and disposable painting, by body art and the messy theatrical antics of La Mama. At its height in the mid-70s, Max's Kansas City on Park and 18th was a home to the New York Dolls, the Ramones, Blondie, Klaus Snow, Nate and Sid Vicious. In the East Village, on Bleecker and Bowery, was CBGB, which was home to television, Patti Smith and many of the bands that also played at Max's. Little temporary art galleries were opening and closing every week in the East Village. Okay, paragraph 5. What is important to remember? So in this cultural world, in the world of arts, everyone knew everyone. Okay? So everyone knew everyone. Okay? That is very, very important. It was also multidisciplinary and simultaneous. So you had loads of different movements, artistic, spontaneous movements. Okay? So you had all this spontaneity, all this diversity in the artistic world. And the downtown scene, so it was in like, it's called the downtown scene, okay, which was literally in the East Village. Now I did have to look up quite a few of the places, some that have actually closed down. So the Mumma Experimental Theatre Club is an off-Broadway theatre founded in 1961. Oh, the lights just come on. Max's Kansas City was a nightclub and restaurant, which became a gathering spot for musicians, poets, artists, politicians in the 60s and 70s. And CBGB, was actually pretty well known, was a New York City music club opened in 1973 in Manhattan's East Village. Okay? Now you have loads of artists that are mentioned. You can look them up. Well, some you should actually know. The Ramones, Blondie, they're well known. New York Dolls not as well known. Klaus Nomi was like an opera singer from Germany who moved to New York City, and he wore a lot of white makeup and wore an upside down triangle, and he actually did end up dying of AIDS. And Sid Vicious, well, so keep that name in mind, please. Keep Sid Vicious in mind. Patti Smith, she is a very, very, very well-known singer. I actually saw her at the Nuit Fourvière, but then we don't really care about my life, do we? But yeah, excellent music. Listen to Patti Smith, please. Okay, let's continue. Sixth paragraph. Meanwhile, there was also the High Mandarin moment, which has scarcely been isolated or studied as a single impulse, but was the last gasp of both a late-age modernism and a 1960s-era radicalism, a paradoxical combination of elitism in aesthetics and egalitarianism bordering on socialism and utopianism in politics. Some of these people weren't interested in politics at all, but if they were, their politics were radical. Mapplethorpe, with his lubricious African-American nudes, portraits of society ladies and still lifes of New York flowers, as he once called them, was one of the few people of the period who braided these high and low strands of New York culture. Okay. So that is another movement, the High Mandarin moment. Okay. So it's like a kind of mix of elitism in aesthetics and egalitarianism. Now one of the man quoted, Mapplethorpe, if you really want to type Mapplethorpe, you can. Just don't type nude, a little warning, okay? Bit of advice, you can look for Mapplethorpe, but don't blame me for anything you see. Okay, paragraph 7. Those were the years when rents were low, when would-be writers, singers, dancers could afford to live in Manhattan's east, if not west. Village, before everyone marginal was further marginalised by being squeezed out of Bushwick or Hoboken. Face-to-face encounters are essential to a city's vitality, even among people who aren't sure of each other's names, for the exchange of ideas and to generate a sense of electricity. In the 1970s, creative people of all sorts could meet without plans, could give each other tips or discuss burgeoning theories or markets or movements. So, very important, the rents were cheaper. As I said, I do not know. I don't think I could actually live there. I'd love to, but I don't have the money. So rents. They could rent a flat for very little. So artists could actually live in Manhattan, which they can't do now. And artists, they could just like meet up anywhere and discuss anything. Okay? They would just meet up and chat. So a lot of spontaneity between artists, okay? Now chapter 8. In gay life, that's in gay life, that's called cruising, although the French equivalent de draguer applies to all denominations. In the period before AIDS, the heyday of Studio 54 and Mineshaft, gays were on the verge of being dubbed trendsetters and tastemakers. Frank Rich even wrote a retrospective article for Esquire in 1987, in which he looked back on the homosexualisation of America, but the outbreak of the plague in 1981 changed all that. Suddenly, the glamour boys with their showboat bodies and high-paying jobs were Auschwitz skeletons covered with black spots. Like Casanova's unfinished marble statues, nobody wanted to exchange kisses with someone infected, especially not before the path of transmission was identified. Poppers, moustaches, mosquitoes, tears. Wherever straight guys had been intrigued with gay life before and could almost contemplate experimenting, suddenly the barrier between the two orientations shot up higher than the Iron Curtain. Okay, so how do we say this? Gays were actually very nearly, I'm not saying they were, but very nearly trendy, okay? I'm not saying they were trendy, well the article's not, I don't have much of a viewpoint on that. They were nearly trendy, they were nearly fashionable, okay? And even like, and this will like remind you of the Buddha of Suburbia, even heterosexual people wanted to try and be with a gay man. A heterosexual man, wanted to try and see what it was all about. However, we've got to remember that like AIDS actually, I think the first known case was at the end of the 60s. And at the end of the 70s, you had more and more people there, like these men becoming skeletons, call them Auschwitz skeletons, and had all these black spots all over their bodies. So nobody actually really knew what was wrong with them. However, it only seemed to affect the gay community. So, yeah. So when like the straight men, the heterosexual men wanted to like dabble in homosexual intercourse, there was suddenly, all of a sudden, they were turned off by any experimentation, any experimenting, sexual experimenting. So that sort of put an end, and the gap between heterosexuals and homosexuals widened. Okay? So even there was a time when they did want to experiment. There was this experimenting. Okay? And in the Buddha of Suburbia, we can see Charlie, who is, I don't even think he was bisexual. Maybe I agree that Kareem is bisexual. However, I don't think Charlie was at all. I think he just wanted to experiment. It was all about experimenting. That is it. Okay? However, once this like, as they call it here, the plague, being AIDS, when they finally were able to name the illness, like gay people and straight people just went their separate ways and there was no mixing. Okay? Okay, paragraph 9. Now the Supreme Court's legalising marriage, equality, and that, with what might be called the banalisation of gay life, the imp of the perverse has made 70s-style queers look more attractive. Brad reminded me that the young gays of the decade had been ruthlessly oppressed when they were growing up in Eisenhower's or Nixon's America. Finally, they were free to be open, he says, and we felt that we were glamorous and attractive. So it's just saying how that the gay people were oppressed during these two presidents. Okay? Now, paragraph 10. But those days, those years are gone. Love among the ruins, one might have called it, a time when young unknowns could achieve fame, or at least rub shoulders with it, if they didn't mind the rats galloping underfoot or stick up in broad daylight on busy Christopher Street. Okay, I think here you've got a really important sentence. Rub shoulders means kutwai. Okay? So, just saying that those days are gone. Okay? The end of that 5-year time span, over. Okay? Before, like anybody, unknowns, anyone could make it. Now here you're probably reminded of Charlie. So even if Charlie did come from like a good, very good upper class family, wealthy family, that was not a guarantee that he would break through, that he would make it as a musician. However, in the USA, in New York City, he was able to become someone. Okay. So, what time period is represented here? What time period is represented here? So we answer this. This is why I ask you to summarise it. When I ask you to summarise an article, it's always to make sure that you've understood it. Because I know what you guys are like. You always answer the questions before actually understanding it. So what time span is represented here? Pretty easy. 1977, blackout, to 1982. So I wasn't even born during this period, was I? 8. Now that is actually great because it falls really spot on with our book. Okay? Because our novel is set literally during that period, which is great. So it's like pretty funny, you have these two events, the blackout where all the city was plunged into darkness, and the naming of the AIDS epidemic. Okay, so what was this period marked by? So it's marked by many aspects, by many things. So first of all, I think would be the dangerous aspect of NYC. Okay? And you're probably thinking, oh, it's, as I said to you earlier on, when I went to New York City, I never felt safer. Didn't feel safe in Miami, but did feel very safe in New York City. But at the time, it was a very, very dangerous place. However, it was more democratic, which is quite contradictory. Moreover, it's a pretty dirty place, when you come to think about it, with the graffiti in the subway. I'm pretty sure if you type on the internet 1970s subway New York City, you'll see. What else was it marked by? So yeah, blackouts, many artistic movements. It wasn't just one, that was the biggest one in 1977. Artistic movements. Okay? The various artistic genres. Okay, there are various artistic genres as well. And they all lived side by side, and it gave the city its unique electricity. So it's really something unique about New York City. Okay, that anyone could make it. Okay, question C. I don't know where that's gone. I'll find it afterwards. So what do you think? What do you think we studied this this article, and how can you relate it to Charlie and Kareem? I didn't think, hey, let's use this. This is great. No, let's read this article. No. Because first of all, Kareem is in New York City now, and his stepbrother / crush is a huge star. Okay? So the first reason is because Kareem and Charlie are both in New York City. Secondly, the timeline fits. The article depicts perfectly the atmosphere. And that anyone can make it. And that anyone being Charlie. Because I don't know if you remember, but in one of the chapters, Kareem said he didn't expect Charlie to go very far. He thought they'd just have be a minor success, have some minor hits, and that would be it. Nobody would talk about him ever again. However, that's not really the case, is it? Because he beats the odds and becomes an international sensation. Now we'll put a little warning sign here, because we said that people who were... There's this artistic, intellectual movement, okay? And they didn't really want to mix with anyone who was from the mainstream. So, is Charlie mainstream, or is he underground? That's one of the questions we can ask ourselves. Okay? And even Kareem, as a live performer, he's going there and he will be able to leave his mark. Okay? As theatre actors are, or were at the time, well respected. So that's for Kareem. Now I also gave you two links to two trailers. Okay, let's let you finish writing that. You can press pause if you want. Now, I found two trailers to this film called didn't know which trailer to use, so I thought I'd just show you them both. So what is the film about? What words come to mind? How can you relate it to the article and to our main characters? So I think we'll include both Charlie and Kareem here. Actually more Charlie, but... Okay, so let's watch them. You can watch them either here or just watch them separately. So I have two trailers. We can watch them both.
Welcome, Sex Pistols.
Your mum said you're a nice boy. Any comment?
Who the hell do you think you are?
Sex Pistols.
This is my girlfriend, Nancy.
You like me, don't you?
Sydney's more than a mere bass player. He's a fabulous disaster.
Sid Vicious is the Sex Pistols.
Okay. That was the first one, the first trailer, which was a bit more recent because it was remastered for the 30th anniversary. And the second one is a lot older, so I'll just show you the second trailer.
I love the Sex Pistols.
Are you going to make an honest woman out of our Nancy Sid? Sydney's more than a mere bass player. He's a fabulous disaster.
Here's a Sex Pistol for your human need to sing to.
You like me, don't you?
Do you really think you can buy Sid off of me? I love you.
Okay. Well, I hope you were able to see them, or just fast forward this. You don't really watch them, or me filming them, just fast forward this part and watch them separately. Okay, now let's talk about them, these two trailers. I really was hesitated, I really didn't know which one to use. Okay? Okay. So what's the film about? Well, I think you can guess it's about a rock star whose name, I'm going to have to use the past tense here, was Sid Vicious. That wasn't his real name, I can't remember his real name, oh dear. That's not his real name, Sid Vicious. So, what is the film about? It's about this singer slash bass player, and you've probably noticed he can either play the bass or sing very well. And his love affair, his relationship with Nancy. Now they're both very young, so I don't want to go into too many details about this. You can watch the film, you can download it, it's actually really good. 1986 is with, what's he called? Oh, I've forgotten his name. No. Gary Oldman, sorry. It's with Gary Oldman, who you probably know him from Harry Potter. He played Sirius Black. But a really great actor. He played Sid Vicious in the film. So it's about the famous bass player. He wasn't in the group for long, and his tumultuous relationship with Nancy. Can't remember her surname. So the main themes of the film are sex, of course, as you can see with Nancy. Drugs, because he was like a huge they both were huge heroin addicts. And rock and roll. As you can see, he was part of the Sex Pistols. Actually, he wasn't part of it for that long, because he replaced their previous bass player, and he was only in it for about a year. So I think it's 1978, and it ended very badly for both of them, because I think they were so out of it one evening in a hotel that Sid ended up stabbing to death Nancy. Yeah. He ended up stabbing to death Nancy. He was released on bail, and a few months afterwards he OD'd and subsequently died. When you OD, you overdose, you normally die. So he OD'd and they both died. He wasn't even 21 and he wasn't even 22. So, yay! Great lifestyle. Irony, of course. Sometimes I have to specify. And he did a real famous cover version of Frank Sinatra's My Way, which doesn't have that sound to it at all originally. So if you like, you can type in Frank Sinatra My Way and Sid Vicious My Way, you'll see it's completely different. So he did a cover version of My Way, which is really good. Okay? So throughout the trailer we hear this iconic version of My Way, and it takes place both in the UK and the USA. Nancy was an American, Sid British. They were the lead singer of the Sex Pistols was Johnny Rotten, who actually is now called John Lydon. He's gone back to his real name. And apparently he still feels guilty for letting Sid Vicious into the band because he wasn't well equipped. He wasn't ready to take on the New York scene. He wasn't ready to take on the music scene. Okay? I think he did try to go clean, to come clean, and I think Nancy just brought him down each time. Okay. Sorry, that was a lot of blah 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 about what the film is about. Now, what words come to mind? And you'll be able to link these words to the Buddha of Suburbia. So the words that I found were like limitless, no limits. Okay? Limitless. Of excess. Okay? I think you can see that in the two trailers. It's very loud. The music is very loud. It's punk music. It's underground. There's also a lot of drugs. And I think he OD'd once. You can see, I think he actually OD'd on numerous accounts. You can see that he's in hospital. He's got what's it called? A perf on him. One of those squishy infusions things. I don't quite know what they call either in French or in English. He actually OD'd more than once. And he always said that he would never ever reach the age of 25. Which he didn't. He got drugs addiction. Alcohol. Got fighting. Also, I think you can actually see dirty fighting. You see the police, guns, shooting. Actually, that is part of the music video for My Way. He used to start shooting everybody in the crowd. Watch it, please do watch it. And it's also like dirt, very dirty, very dirty. You can see dirty New York here as well. And they live in appalling conditions because they are junkies, literally. Stage, money. We see Nancy talking to somebody, and she says, "You can't buy my Sid from me." And you see Sid Vicious falling to sleep. I think that's actually part of an iconic, very iconic interview where Sid Vicious just slept during the whole interview. I think he was so out of it, I don't think it was even stoned, I think it's a lot more than that, that he couldn't stay awake for the interview. Okay, and we see him getting arrested once at the end when they found Nancy's dead body. So how can you relate it? How can you relate these two trailers or the trailer to our main characters? So it embodies everything that Kareem yearns for, that he wants. He is craving. So Kareem craves this lifestyle. He said that. Remember his epiphany in chapter 1? This is what Kareem craves for. He wants this lifestyle. Maybe a tamer version, without so many drugs. A lot tamer, but this is what he wants. He wants to be part of the scene. He wants everybody to want him. He wants to be famous, successful. He wants limitless sex, to take as many drugs as possible, and to be famous. To be a famous, recognised artist. Okay? Famous, successful, an artist. So we can note many similarities between Sid Vicious and Charlie Hero. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce. Like a mirror effect between Sid Vicious and Charlie Hero. As I said, I don't quite know how to pronounce that. Is it hero as like somebody who's heroic, or is it hero for heroine? So you decide. Is he Charlie Hero or Charlie Hero? So in the previous scene, I don't know if you remember, but this is like going back quite a few chapters. Charlie had donned the punk look with the Mohican, and he had like safety pins all over his body, all on his clothes everywhere, just like Sid Vicious. And his music sounds very much like the Sex Pistols. And I actually think he will mention Johnny Rotten later on, but I do think he mentions the Sex Pistols previously. And furthermore, Charlie is able to have sex with as many women possible. Okay? And actually, it differs a bit to Sid, because Sid was in love solely with Nancy, which I don't know everything about his life, so they might have had affairs, but so that's about it. And that Charlie really does embody sex, drugs. Drugs and rock and roll. Okay? Now that's it for today. I haven't finished part J, Identity Quest Beyond Social Conventions, Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll. We've still got to study like three passages, 3 excerpts from chapter 17. Okay? And we'll do that in class, because remember I said you'd have a small test, because I hope you've listened to these videos, and I hope you've worked, and I will soon find out. So we'll finish part J next week. I hope these 3 videos helped you. I'm sorry they're a bit long, but at least they're complete. Have a lovely day, and I will see you all next week.